I had thought of sharing a few slides. Now I'm really glad that I didn't after that. Um, Thank you, Annie, for sharing those amazing photos and those inspiring stories of ingenuity and resilience of these women who are not in the headlines but are doing such important work. That was really inspiring. So I'm curious, how many people in this room, like me, like to hike? Does anybody like to hike here? Okay, cool. So I'm going to give you an analogy which I think will hopefully make sense to everybody. I think about the work that we're doing as being a bit like hiking in the backcountry without a map, without a trail, where we have some sense of where we're trying to go, but we're having to make the path as we move forward. Now, with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, we have some signposts along the way, but we're still having to pick our way across unknown terrain. And it's really important that as we do so, we keep our eyes focused on the path in front of us so we don't trip over a rock or step on a rattlesnake. At the same time, it's really important that periodically we stop, look up, look around, and try to see what's coming and what might be sort of beyond the horizon. Is there a rainstorm that's approaching that means it's time to get off this ridge and take shelter? Is there a river where we can stop and get some water for our journey? Is that big furry animal bounding down the slope towards us a dog or a bear? That's a real example. It was a bear, and I survived. So my name is Jacob Park, and I would like to be your hiking buddy. I recently joined BSR as the director of our new Sustainable Futures Lab. And the purpose of the Futures Lab is to help us with this process of periodically looking up, taking account of what are the changes that are coming our way that we need to consider as we're making our path towards the top of this mountain. We are augmenting the great work that BSR has already been doing, helping you guys blaze this trail forward with the capacity to think long-term and to look around and really grapple with complexity, uncertainty, and disruptive change. And needless to say, there's a lot of change coming our way. I want you guys to think back to 2012. Just to orient you, this was the year that we had the Summer Olympics in London. Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney. Ban Ki-moon was dancing Gangnam Style. Now, thinking back then, how many of you would have predicted that 5 years later, China and India would be taking the lead on the transition to renewable energy? Was anybody assuming that was going to happen or even considering it? No hands. How many of you would think that 5 years later, we'd be unlocking our cell phones just by looking at them? Maybe one hand back there. How many people thought that Donald Trump would be president? Yeah. These are changes that are hugely disruptive and have taken many of us by surprise. However, there were signs there for those who were looking for them. I actually wrote about all of these changes 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't write about Donald Trump specifically, but I did think about the possibility of the rise of nationalism and xenophobia in the United States, but I could not have predicted Trump. Futures thinking is all about looking for these early weak signals of some of these changes that might come, thinking about what they would mean for us, and rehearsing what are the strategic responses so that we're not blindsided by this kind of disruptive change that seems to be coming at us faster and faster. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the other big disruptive changes that we see coming at us that are going to reshape the landscape, not just for sustainability, but for business in general. And if you take a look at our Redefining Sustainable Business report, we go into a little bit more depth about our thinking on some of these big issues. So first of all, climate change. I think it's safe to say climate change is happening, it's real, and we're in it now. There's no question that climate change is going to be disruptive to every business in this room. Any business that has a global supply chain is going to feel the impacts of climate change. And as Vice President Gore did a great job of talking about last night, it's not only the extreme weather effects, but it's some of these secondary and tertiary impacts, like on our food supply system and refugee issues. There's going to be disruption, and we have to be preparing for that. At the same time, there are new solutions emerging that are incredibly powerful, and they're happening a lot faster than anybody predicted. Vice President Gore did a great job of showing us just how quickly the transition to renewable energy is taking off, with the rapid drop in price of solar energy coupled with the rise in storage capacity of batteries and a shift to electrification of cars. I thought it was amazing to hear last night that California is now also considering a ban on gasoline-powered cars. That's a pretty disruptive and amazing change. And I don't know about you guys, but that graph of Chile's projected solar energy installations just kind of blew my mind. This is happening really fast. We're on a tipping point. One thing that he didn't really dig into too much was our food system and the incredible opportunities in the way that we do agriculture to actually mitigate and reduce climate change. There was a study that came out last week that found that better land management practices, different types of agriculture, could sequester 30% more carbon than previously thought, and that would be the equivalent of stopping the burning of oil. This is a major impact. Another big bucket of change is, of course, artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of hype around artificial intelligence for years. I think it's finally warranted. We are really experiencing a paradigm shift in AI these days. From the time when Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov 20 years ago, that was a rules-based approach to AI where we had to teach Deep Blue, here's how you would play chess in this scenario. And now we've moved to a situation where AIs are learning on their own how to do things better, and this is going to be transformative. Some of these applications are going to be ones that are going to enable us to move sustainability forward. This wouldn't be a futures talk without at least one reference to killer robots. So I don't know if you guys know this, but they are already among us. Right now, as we speak, there are submersible robots patrolling coral reefs around the world, killing invasive species, killing lionfish, who are invasive species in those regions. Now, we are automating the protection of that ecosystem, but what sort of ethical issues does this, bring up for us to think about setting up an algorithm to kill animals en masse? How do we feel about that? There are going to be some really thorny questions to grapple with as we move forward. Finally, the question of inclusive economic growth. Obviously, we're all thinking about automation and jobs. There are new technologies that have just been becoming possible in the past year or so that are going to make it possible to automate the production of clothing. And I think this is going to have a really big impact on, obviously, the global apparel industry, but also worker livelihoods around the world. And what is our response going to be to that? How are we going to grapple with that? So these are just a few of the changes that are going to have major impacts, not just on sustainability, but on core business strategy. They're going to be complex, and the trajectories are also going to be really unpredictable. There's still a lot of questions. Is this turn towards nationalism that we've seen lately, is this the new normal, or is this the last gasp of some outdated ideology, and a few years from now, we're going to be done with it? Let's hope. How fast is some of this automation going to be deployed? And will our governments be able to respond quickly enough? Will our educational institutions be able to respond quickly enough to retrain workers and to help those who have been displaced? As climate change impacts worsen, are we going to turn towards some geoengineering solutions as ways to actually accelerate our decarbonization, but with a lot of unknown risks about possible unintended consequences? So these are just some of the really big questions that we're going to be facing, and the fact is there's no way to know for sure the answer to any of these. So this is where futures thinking can really help. Futures helps us think about plausible possibilities in the future imagine what those might look like, what the implications would be, rehearse how we'd respond to those, and really prepare us to proactively deal with them rather than scrambling to keep up after they become mainstream. So BSR's new Sustainable Futures Lab has been designed to help all of you with just that. One of the things that we're going to be doing is using scenario planning to help businesses not just plan for one future that they think is going to happen, but consider a wide range of possibilities, test strategy against that, make sure that what you're thinking of doing is actually resilient to these different plausible possibilities. We're also going to be futurizing some of the work that we already do, like materiality assessments. How do we make those less static and more about some of the changes that are unfolding that are going to shift which issues are material as we go into the future. This is going to be supported by a new research program to really dig into these emerging issues that we think might be disruptive. We're going to be setting up a horizon scanning practice where we're going to be looking across many different domains and trying to identify what are the early indicators of some of these issues before they become mainstream. We're going to create a network of experts from around the world in different areas and convene them periodically to make sense of what they're seeing and then share that with you guys. This will also shape our agenda for deeper dive reports into some of these topics. Finally, we're going to be augmenting the work that BSR is already doing on collaboration. We're going to be infusing futures thinking into some of our existing collaborations and also launching new collaborations to look at some of these issues in more detail. One of the ones that's slated for next year is a Future of Supply Chains Lab, where we're going to be building upon the work that that team has been doing already. You may have seen the Future of Supply Chains primer that they published a couple of weeks ago, which is great. We're going to be building on that and considering some of the more disruptive changes that might be coming as well. So as Aaron talked about last night, we really are at an inflection point where the changes that are coming are eroding the boundary between sustainable business and just business in general. These are no longer issues that can be siloed for a sustainability team and separate from core business strategy. And my hope is that futures will be a tool that all of you can use to bring these issues to the leadership of your companies and make apparent just how important it is that they move forward on these. So I hope that futures thinking will help all of you navigate these changes, help our business leaders understand how essential these are, and help blaze a trail towards the summit of a just and prosperous society on a healthy planet. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.